Welcome back, everyone. As always, it is a blessing to be here. Today, we are covering the XRP Ledger's first half earnings, and specifically why a network that settled $159 billion collected almost nothing for doing it. Here is what we will be looking at. 4 things: the volume, the revenue, the shift underneath both of them, and the bill that arrives every month regardless. By the end, you will be able to check every number I say against the same report I read. We start with XPR Network, as always, and tonight XPR is doing something useful that has nothing to do with its price. XPR is at roughly 0.3 of a cent, up close to 5% on the day, ranked around 301st with a market cap near $90 million. It is the smallest thing I put on screen, and it raises the question this entire video is about, which is simple to ask, and almost nobody asks it. What is a payment network actually worth? Not what does its token trade at? What does the network itself earn for the work it does? Because that is a different question from price, and it is the one that tells you whether a thing is a business or a story. A token can go up for 100 reasons. A network's revenue only goes up if people are using it and paying for it. Those two numbers can point in completely opposite directions, and for the XRP Ledger, over the first half of this year, they did exactly that. So here's the first number, and it is genuinely a big one. In the first half of 2026, the XRP Ledger settled $159.9 billion. That is real value moving across the network in 6 months. And I want to put that next to something so the scale lands properly. XRP's entire market capitalization tonight is about $90.8 billion. So the ledger moved roughly 1.76 times its own market cap in half a year. Whatever else you think about this asset, the network is not idle. Money is going through it. And that is the part almost every video about this report will stop at, because it is the flattering number. $159 billion sounds enormous. It is enormous, and it makes for a very easy thumbnail. But it is only half of the sentence, and the other half is the interesting one. Because for all of that volume, the fees the network collected came to $1.18 million, not billion, million. And that is down 81.6% from 6.43 million in the same period a year earlier. So the volume is enormous and the revenue collapsed. Those two facts are sitting in the same report, covering the same 6 months, describing the same network. If you only read one of them, you will walk away with completely the wrong idea. And which one you read depends entirely on who is making the video. Let me do that division on screen, because the result is the whole story. 1.18 million divided by 159.9 billion is about $7.38 for every $1 million settled. $7.38 to move a million. For comparison, and I want to be careful here because it is not a perfect comparison, a card network's merchant rate is somewhere around 2%. On that same $1 million, 2% is 20,000. Now, those are not the same product, and the card fee covers a lot of things the ledger fee does not. But as a measure of what the transport layer itself charges to move value, $7.38 against 20,000 is not a small difference. It is roughly 2,700 times cheaper. And this is where I want to give you my read, because I think most of the coverage of this report is going to get it backwards. Read the headline on its own and it sounds like a disaster. Revenue down 81% is a terrible sentence in any other industry. If a company told you its revenue fell 81%, you would not be buying the stock. But a settlement layer is not a company selling you something. Its job is to move value at as close to zero cost as it can manage. The fee is friction, and friction is the thing it exists to remove. A payment network bragging about high fees is a payment network that has misunderstood its own purpose. So the question is not why did revenue fall? The question is what kind of activity left and what arrived to replace it. And the report breaks that down properly, which is why it is worth reading rather than reading about. The swap pool fees on the Ledger's automated market maker fell 80.3%. NFT royalties fell 69%. And ordinary transaction fees, the plain business of moving XRP from one place to another, fell 66.3% from $269,600 down to $90,800. Look at what those three things have in common. Automated market maker swaps are trading. NFT royalties are speculation. Both of those are what a chain earns when people are gambling on it. That is the money that left, and it left across the whole industry, not just here. So the character of what the ledger carries has changed, and that is a more interesting fact than the revenue line. A chain full of traders and NFT flippers generates a lot of fee revenue and very little settled value. A chain carrying institutional settlement generates enormous settled value and almost no fee revenue. Those are two different businesses that happen to run on the same software. And over 6 months, this one moved from the first to the second. Because the same report has a number in it that I have not seen in a single thumbnail. And it is the one I would build the whole story around. The stablecoin base sitting on the XRP Ledger grew 1,131% over that same period. Ripple's own stablecoin RLUSD reached $1.56 billion in total supply by the 30th of June, and 52% of that supply is held on the XRP Ledger, up from roughly 10% a year earlier. So while the trading fees were falling away, dollars were arriving. That is not a small rotation. Going from 10% to 52% of your own stablecoin choosing to live on your ledger inside 12 months is the kind of change that shows up in what the network is for, long before it shows up in what the network earns. Put those side by side, and the report reads completely differently. Same ledger, 12 months apart, carrying a different kind of money for a different kind of user at a fee level that reflects who is actually using it now. I want to be honest that this is my interpretation and not the report's conclusion. The report gives you the numbers. What I have just given you is a reading of them, and a reading can be wrong, but it fits the data better than the alternative, which is that a network moving $159 billion is somehow dying. And now I have to give you the other side, because a video that only tells you the good half is not worth watching. There are 3 numbers in this report that work against holders, and they are not small. The first is escrow. Approximately 272 million XRP is added to the circulating supply every month. At tonight's price, that is somewhere near $394 million of new supply arriving monthly, every month, regardless of what the price does. The second is what that adds up to. Annual dilution runs about 5.5% a year. So the asset needs to appreciate 5.5% annually just to leave a holder exactly where they started. The third is the one that stings. Of the fees the network does collect, only 10.6% reaches XRP holders. 10.6% of 1.18 million is about $125,000 over 6 months across the entire holder base. I am going to say that as plainly as I can because it matters more than any price target. If you hold this asset, the network's own revenue is not what pays you. It cannot be. $125,000 spread across a $90 billion asset is a rounding error. What pays you is somebody buying it from you at a higher price, and what that person is buying is the expectation that this settlement volume eventually matters. That is not a criticism. It is true of almost every asset in this market, but it should be said out loud because a lot of people are being sold the idea that ledger activity translates into holder returns, and at these numbers it does not yet. One line on the rest of the market and then we come back. Bitcoin is around 80,300, up about 2%. Ethereum is near 2,515, up under 1%. Stellar is at roughly 19 cents. Hedra near 8 cents, both up between 1 and 2%. Fear and greed sits at 73, which is greed, and total market capitalization is about $2.67 trillion. Nothing there changes the argument. It is a calm green day underneath a report that is far more interesting than the tape. Which brings me back to where we started, and back to XPR. The reason I opened on the smallest name on the board is that this report applies a test that most of this industry cannot pass. If a network's value is the volume it settles rather than the fees it charges, then scale is everything because $7.38 per million only becomes a real business at enormous volume. XPR is a $90 million network. XRP is a $90 billion network. That is 1,000 to 1. At $7.38 per million, a small chain does not earn a business no matter how good the technology is. It earns a rounding error. That is not a knock on XPR, and I am not telling you it fails. I am telling you that the economics this report describes only work at the top of the market. And that is worth knowing before you extrapolate a large chain story onto a small one. So here is what would confirm this reading and what would break it, stated in advance so you can hold me to it. It holds up if the stablecoin share on the ledger keeps climbing past 52%, and if settled volume stays above 150 billion in the second half. It breaks if settlement volume falls with the fees, because that would mean the activity left entirely rather than changing character. And the thing that would genuinely change the investment case rather than just the narrative is any mechanism that moves more than 10.6% of network revenue to holders. I will read the next one the same way, whichever direction it points. As always, none of this is financial advice, and nothing here is a price prediction. Every figure I have quoted tonight comes from the first half 2026 XRP earnings analysis, and the arithmetic on top of it, the $7.38 per million and the $125,000 to holders, I did myself from those figures, so that you can pull the same report and check every one of them. Please do that. If this was useful, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you catch these breakdowns as they come.